Hey guys, welcome back to the Attachment Point News Roundtable. Here with David Gritz and Bryan Falchuk of InsurTechNY, in the future of insurance. Welcome guys, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us on, Brett.
Oh yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you, David. We had some good banter ahead of time. So what brought us together today, guys? Why are we doing this? What are we up to over here?
Well, so what brought us together is me harassing you, but luckily you said yes. No, but so myself, David, and Tony Lew from InsurTechNY and some other folks from around the industry, places like CB Insights and Conning and other organizations have been coming together to try to help the way the industry works together to innovate, to put those innovations into practice and to move forward. It's something we're calling the Insurance Collaboration Index. And that's what I reached out to you about, but it's something that actually exists in other industries. There's one in like the auto industry, there's one in pharma and a few other places. But basically the point is like, you've got all these suppliers and for us, it's the InsurTechs, the folks creating solutions that carriers can use. And you've got the incumbents that, all these suppliers are selling to. And the question is, how well do they work together? How easy is it to get some of these solutions into these carriers, to get them into the hands, of the insureds or helping the insureds in a claim, getting a policy, risk management, like whatever the solution might be about. And what you find is, and being around the startup scene, and Brett, I know you've seen this and heard lots of this too, like every carrier is different. Some are easier to work with than others. Some are easy in these areas and not these. And myself, like having sold for a startup, saw that firsthand as well. And it's like, what if we could take the best practices from around the industry and share them and say like, who's doing really well? How are they doing well? What are they doing that puts them, on the, hey, these are a great partner. These are easier to work with than someone else. What if we could spread that around and really help like rising tides lift all boats kind of thing, get the industry to perform better. And for those who are struggling, like maybe help bring some light on where you're struggling, why, and what you can do about it. So you become a partner of choice. Because, if you've been in the startup scene, like stories go around. It's like, oh, these guys are great to work with. This carrier is trickier. You want to be one of those sought after partners because you get access to the best solutions then. And so we're trying to help the industry get to that kind of place.
No, it's awesome. And I appreciate it. And thanks for hopping on too, David and Bryan. Always phenomenal talking to you about the industry. It is very like Byzantine, like it's very, I don't know how to explain it, but there's regions, there's carriers, there's contacts, there's different doors in. And it's funny, but like you shouldn't need like me or you or like a guide, hopefully, ideally there'd be a little bit more of a place in a map, And I know David's working on InsurTechNY. I know you guys get a lot more credit for like kind of carrier side interactivity. InsurTechNY's been killing it, David. Thanks for joining today, and pleasure to meet you.
Glad to be on. And I think maybe one thing to add on to what Bryan had mentioned about the index and at least my perspective of the excitement I have for it is that just this year there's been $10 billion that's been invested in InsurTechs. And if you're sitting on the table as a venture capitalist, you're looking for how do I make sure those dollars are spent really well? And you don't want your founders going down a path, going in the bowels of an insurance carrier and not coming out for 24 months.
Oof.
Because if that happens, there's a lot of money wasted all around, right? The founder's original seed money, the venture capitalist money, and the carrier's time and resources. So if we can really provide insights into what things are best to do and what carriers are more nimble, then that money, that $10 billion is going to be well spent. And there's going to be a generation of InsurTech founders that create a lot of wealth that are going to continue to support and bring the industry to the next level.
I couldn't agree more. And like not random, but just even the personal, mental, emotional impact too. If you're a founder, if you raise all this money, if you're watching the burn and you're stuck in some bureaucracy or a company that doesn't want to work with you or doesn't even understand their own API, it's not going to fare well for your mental health. It's hard,
and for your team, right? Because like, especially for startups, and this is not just about startups, but, absolutely there's a strong startup story to it. You're at a startup, runway is a front and center issue for you constantly. And you as a founder, a lot of them put a lot of their personal wealth and certainly sweat equity on the line. It's one thing to ask you personally to make a decision to be like, it's going to be tight for a few months till these deals close and they're taking a lot longer. But once you start building out a team, once you get people dependent on you, you can't just be like, can everybody just not take a paycheck for 4 months so we can, because this deal is held up because someone's on vacation, or, we have to go back through this other process. And it's not to say any of those points in the process aren't important or necessary, but can we do it differently? Can we engage in different ways? And can we recognize that I just had a startup friend of mine just closed one of the major carriers yesterday and put out a press release. And I did the math on it, and it was 31 months from their first demo to closure. And luckily, that's the longest they've ever had. Most of them don't take that long, but that's also not atypical. We talk about 18 months as the norm, but that is a tremendous amount of time for any company.
Oh, yeah.
So can't we, we have to be able to do better than that. And there are ways to do that, but we need to be sharing those ways so we can learn and get that inspiration.
Well, and I'm just kind of spitballing here. David, I know, is going to have way more experience from actually building a company and selling it to a carrier. But 50 different states, 50 different regulatory bodies, all sorts of different lines of insurance. I think whether it's a line in a state or jurisdiction, you can definitely test smaller. It's not like it's all or nothing, with these projects and ideas. But David, so you'd mentioned ahead of time that you'd built a company before, and that really is kind of where you got involved in helping startups and kind of growing. That's very interesting how your own experiences, kind of knowledge share that you're bringing over now to startups as well.
Yeah. So no, definitely bringing that over. So with Zero, we were very fortunate in our business model that it didn't purely rely on our customers being insurance carriers. So our platform was a behavioral-based safety platform that essentially helped workers' comp insurers to not have to pay out as many claims, because at the end of the day, people were more aware of issues like walking into a forklift or lifting too much weight or texting and driving, all the things that are preventable. And in fact, more than 70% of the time, workers' comp injuries are preventable. But for our specific situation, we were really fortunate because we essentially spun out of a group captive. So we had 36 captive companies that were all interested in piloting with us. We were really lucky early on to get Bron as a first customer, and then quickly afterwards to get Everest behind us to introduce them to their end clients. And I think that's an example of a great magic trick, right? Is if you can be working with the insurance company's customers, right? The ultimate policyholders, and you have some value to add, then it makes that pathway easier, because a mid-size bus company in New Jersey can make a much quicker decision when it's one person at the table that owns the whole company with his 2 kids running it, than if it's a situation where you have to go through 3 committees to just get a proof of concept. So I think I'm hoping through the index, we will find more anecdotes and more data that supports some of these pathways where if you can do something to benefit the carrier's end client or the broker's end client, that maybe that's a faster way to prove the value and ultimately get full enterprise support.
It's funny you say that. I always think people pay attention to who's putting money in their pocket. If you come and you're asking for resources, it's different than like, hey, these people who bring in resources, we're coming in with them. When I start a new relationship, I try to usually have like a deal or 2 lined up. So you kind of knock on the door, you're like, hey, here we go, here's a deal, proof of concept. Let's also keep working together on things. I think that's a really smart way to look at it. Yeah.
So for people who are watching who are like, that's great, or I don't get it, kind of like, where is it? Where are we at in the process? So we obviously ITC just happened not too long ago. That was a great time to put this out. So we opened up the survey then, and what we're looking for is for all the InsurTechs out there, hop into the survey. It doesn't take long, and give feedback. And it's totally anonymous. One of the things that some people have gotten hung up on is we actually need you to name names. So it's really critical that you say, like, we ask, who's a carrier that you worked with, and tell us about that experience. And there's different things we'll ask about it, like, the contracting process and how bought in were they, and did they resource it appropriately? Was there someone who owned, owned the success of it internally, and lots of questions like that. You can do it for up to 5 carriers, but for some people, they're like, well, what if they find out that I said this? Totally anonymous, that doesn't go anywhere, but it is critical that we know which carriers you're talking about, to know, who's performing well and who's got room to improve, so we can see, like, who are the stars. That it's an index, it's rank ordering. So, like, what are carriers that are at the forefront, that are doing some great things, and let's dig into those stories more so we can share with the industry. And, I mentioned other industries where this has happened. Like, that's been a game changer in the auto industry. There's this group, Plant Moran, who does an auto supplier index. They're like 20 plus years into it. And now it's like a totally normal, everyday kind of thing for the industry. The automakers are fully on board and actually like push their suppliers to complete the survey instead of being scared of it, because they recognize this is where we get that open feedback about how we can improve in a way that, when you're looking at us face to face and you're worried about keeping or losing our business, you may not be as honest with us as we need you to be. So the automakers actually appreciate having this anonymous tool that gets them true feedback. So I think, after we've come out with the first set of results, the carriers out there, and some of them have already been stepping up to support it, they'll see that this actually can be incredibly helpful. Because I know from talking to so many carriers, this is something the carriers are struggling with too, is how do we get better at this stuff? Because we have to move faster. And they certainly recognize that in the pandemic. You can't take 2 years to have remote working or, like digital claims experiences when everything has to be remote. So I think there's a need in the industry to get this information and get it honestly and openly. And that's the structure we tried to provide by creating this anonymous way to give real feedback on individual carriers.
Yeah, and then to your point, sorry, I peeked at my phone because I've been listening to Andy Grove's High Management Output. It's awesome. Like, I kind of stumbled on it through like Ben Horowitz and the 16Z guys, but he goes back to like building a breakfast and how you want to solve the problem at like good or bad eggs, not at like the finished product. But yeah, kind of go down source, to your point, one of the startups I'm helping, I've been involved in a couple of carrier conversations. One took 2 years, lost a bunch of resources, never finished a project. Yeah. One wouldn't even talk to us. It's almost like the story of Three Little Pigs. And one we were able to like run right through, and it wasn't necessarily on our terms, but get like an opportunity to do like a kind of low lift proof of concept. But yeah, you're right. It was three totally different experiences, 3 totally different carriers, all big household names, people working nationally. But how you get in, who gets you in there, what kind of resources they have, IT versus a venture person, they're going to have different allocations. You would think the venture guy could open the door, but maybe he doesn't have internal swing. And maybe the marketing budget might be open to this, lead source operation. Like you said, there's definitely a reason why you kind of have old hands leading you through this, but why not make the information available? I've really enjoyed like a blue ocean mindset to this InsurTech insurance thing, because at the end of the day, I think we're all trying to do the same thing, help people get more product out,
Yeah. So one, I think David paints a really great picture of like, it's a snowball. Mm-hmm. It's a good snowball. It's not going to wreck anything. Like, we want it rolling and picking up steam. So we want the kind of innovation and new ideas thriving. We want the venture money coming in because it creates better ways for us to do things, better solutions to get there. So we need to foster that as an industry. And we can't foster that by taking, super long time, being really complicated, when there may be a better way to get through some of those really important gates. But that just takes being open and honest about it and understanding, well, how else could we do this? And it's not a small versus big carrier problem. Like, there's small carriers who are amazing to work with, and there's small carriers who are more difficult to work with. And there are giant carriers who are exactly what you'd expect from a hierarchy and slowness standpoint. And there's others who are just like, we're going to get this done. It's almost a choice. You just have to know what you're choosing. And so I think there'll be some really useful insights from that perspective, regardless of where you sit in the industry size, and are you mutual or stock or whatever. You can sort of equal out a lot of those things and recognize you can still engage differently and more effectively for the industry. And we all need that.
Yeah, totally. Hopefully not putting you on the spot too much, David, but any like early findings that kind of caught you by surprise? Anything you thought would kind of shake out one way, but shaking out a little bit differently than expected so far?
Yeah, definitely. So before we did the survey, we did, I would say, our own market research on the survey and actually interviewed people and had them complete the survey verbally as they went through it to understand. So there were a lot of learnings in phase one, and we actually took the entire survey, almost completely threw it out and redid it. So I think one thing we learned was asking people too many open-ended questions, which should be obvious, was not the best way to collect data, because they go in too many different directions. So there's no way for us to normalize it and standardize it and make it useful. So we did our best to make it as quantifiable for every question that we possibly could, that could also be aggregated. The second thing that surprised me as some of the data has been coming in is just frankly how honest people are. I mean, I originally thought that people would just use this survey as an opportunity to reward or only do the survey on the carriers that were the absolute best, and we would get a lot of really high rankings. And that is not the case. People have been honest. There has been some good ones, some bad ones, a combination of both, some that are just straight down the middle. And that's exactly what we want. We're not looking to only reward the good carriers or only punish the bad carriers. So we want to see the entire picture and really understand it and be able to share with the world what we learned so everyone can get better. And I think that was just surprising to me. I thought there was going to be a lot of bias, and at least from what's been coming in, there hasn't been the bias in the level that I thought there would be.
I gotta think it almost might be like therapeutic, you know, for the founders, for, you know, for whoever else to kind of talk through it, you know. And then Bryan, yeah, with your book, you know, this has to be kind of a cool, you know, you look at the carriers, you talk to the startups, and then now this, I don't want, you know, seems to be a bridge, you know, it seems like you're kind of working on
100%. Yeah. I mean, and I think there's more to come on that front. Is so once we find out, you know, who are some carriers that really stand out, you know, I like to do the case study kind of thing. What can we pick apart from that and learn from it? And then how do we take that forward as an industry? So we could say like, okay, their context is different, but maybe I can pick up these three things that they did. Or, you know, that's an interesting way of rethinking the idea of like the IT security questionnaire, or resourcing it, or like whatever the issue is. But I think without seeing how these things act in practice, it could be really hard to get them implemented in a meaningful way, because people hear a theory and like, oh yeah, we'll do that, and they do it, but you find out it's like, that's not really making a difference. They just created another committee, and that wasn't really what the answer was. So how do you like tangibly do a lot of this stuff? And David's right. You can review up to 5 carriers in a single submission, and you'll see that like it's almost like they've got, you know, good, better, best, or like bad, mediocre, better, best. Like, and some of the founders I reached out to, they're like, well, what should we do? Should we just do the giant carriers? Should we just do the ones we really? I'm like, you should do openly what you think represents your experience with anyone who stands out in any direction, or there's some insight from it. But not all good, not all bad, not all big, not all small. Like it's totally up to you. And so you'll see like, here's a big one who we really struggled with, and here's a big one who things went really well. And you dig into it and it's like interesting. You see the differences in how they rate the specific sub questions. And there's some open-ended still, so that we have some meat to turn to say like, well, why was this better? So people are filling those out. We don't get a lot of blank answers on the open-endeds, which is great. That means it's going to be useful. So yeah, well, you know, there's definitely a lot we can do with the responses once they come in, and start to paint a picture of what does being better mean for the industry, and how do we even get there. So I'm pretty excited for that.
Hopefully don't ruin any plans, but it's almost like I can create like a UN or something, and have some sort of like opt-in later. Be like, hey, if you want to be part of this community, we need this, this, and this from you. You know? Yeah.
Hopefully we argue less than the UN. But, yeah, that would be good.
Flags though. We need the different carriers and the tiered seats. You know. No, it's super interesting, and I don't fault carriers a lot of time too, because I think of them almost as like governments or like giant cruise ships. You know, like you can't turn that thing too fast. You know, and it's got a lot of momentum and it's headed somewhere. You know, but at the same time, you know, you need improvements. What gets measured gets improved. And I think it's a really cool way to do feedback.
Yeah. Well, and Brett, like, as a broker, you take like an application, and it's like, for years we've been asking 100 questions on this product. Maybe not all of them are mandatory or get filled out, but let's say it's 80. And, there's pressure to ask fewer questions and have a faster process. And so what do? Like, we look at those questions and say, okay, we've always asked these. We could get rid of this one. Maybe we don't need to ask that, or we can do that post bind. And so you end up paring back, and you get to like 70 with 60 of them that are mandatory, and you pat yourself on the back because it's better, right? But actually, then you see a startup who asks like name and address and some contact detail, and that's it. And it's like they have 3 questions. I would say like the 0 question underwriting, it's really 3 usually. It's like you at least need to know who you're talking to, but beyond that, they don't ask anything. But if you're starting from something, generally the best we're going to do is to refine. And there's nothing wrong with refinement, but what if you had someone to guide you on rethinking it? And I think that's what seeing something like this can help with, is if you only know the way you did it, yes, you can make it better. And I know everyone in the industry is capable of that. But what if you had some real meaningful examples of people who have completely thought about this differently? It might spark a meaningful change that you wouldn't have come up with otherwise, because you just, your mind was already framed in the art of the possible. So I think this becomes really valuable in getting us to rethink our approaches to things.
Well, David's point kind of from the beginning, I've had a lot of work experience around restaurants. If you see people not wearing non-slip shoes, they're going to probably fall. You see cut gloves, and then lifting, but outside of those 3, probably not going to have any other weird accidents. Maybe you get burnt with like a fryer. To David's point earlier too about the training, and those questions are interesting too. Like, are you taking core samples? Like, are you working above X amount of feet? Are you working on a dock? Like, there's a reason why they're there, because like statistically those things can be high incidences, and if you cancel those out, you're probably not going to get hurt. So I definitely see both sides of it. And for the 3-click guys, there's a lot of data out there that should work well. And there's certain portals that put the data in front of you, and they're mostly good. They're within, I would call, a 25%, data accuracy, which for the most part, for small business, you're probably going to be okay. But I agree. I think the middle ground and the middle way is often underappreciated. Everyone's always so extreme. They don't want to change, or they want to change everything. It's like, hey, why not change something?
Yeah, but on average, right? Right. So let's see the data, and let's see, like, okay, so middle ground yields better results, and people like those carriers better. Fantastic. Let's see that. And so right now, like, all we know is the ones who do way too much the hard way, and then the really disruptive ones who are like, no, we're not going to ask anything, and everything's in easy process. I don't know what the answer is, but that's why we got to ask, and let's hear from the people who are living with it firsthand. That's our underwriting result, so to speak, is from those providers, what their experience is and how it's going. I think it's really critical.
Oh, totally. And the critique is that they do small business the same way they do medium business, and it's too complicated for small business. Tony Kanyas has a funny line where he says, the broker's default is yes, the underwriter's default is no. So just trying to. On
average, it's maybe. That doesn't help.
Yeah. So like, I don't know, like you said, you're trying to find that proper middle ground and try to keep communicating. David, coming into the insurance industry from the outside, with your last startup, does it seem chaotic? Does it seem overdone? Does it seem simple? Like, the more you're around it, does there seem like some sort of old hand logic? What do you think of all of us crazy?
So the funny thing is, most people that come to the insurance industry come from other industries that are a little faster moving, like consumer goods. But the startup I had before, as I mentioned, the network of incubators, and we had software around that was EdTech software. So sadly, EdTech is almost the same universe. Like, you talk about mini governments. I mean, functionally, some of the universities actually would be considered from a legal perspective almost a government. So selling into universities, at least from my experience, is very comparable to insurance. You have a lot of people in committees, like decisions happen in a year because they only have certain types of meetings once a year, and they have sometimes not the most logical from the outside way of making decisions. But one thing that I would say that, I mean, all of those things I said are pretty obvious, but I think one thing that is very much similar in insurance to education that I think people don't fully appreciate is, I'll call it the fast follow mentality. So if you think about it, if tier one carrier does a certain thing, like they decide that no code platforms are the way to go, then a lot of other carriers are going to follow that and need to get a strategy behind that. In the same way with ed tech, right? You have the Ivy League schools, or we'll call it the US News Top 100. When those schools do something, right? Like they decide to call their entrepreneurship program like entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity, or it to be called like their hatching idea house or whatever, then like half of them have like a similar name, and they don't even feel bad about copying each other, even though you think like academic is about creative expression and new ideas, and that's how you get your PhD. But from an administrative perspective, once you have your PhD, you might as well just copy everyone else that's doing a good job. So I think that's one thing that I learned from the ed tech side of things that is very common in insurance. And I think what's unique about that from a startup perspective is it means that there's a tipping point, right? Like if you or the other class of startups that are doing the same thing get to the point where it's inevitable that you need to have it, then you can go from a small company to a bigger company really quickly. Like Uncork is a good example of that.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that, because the whole early is also hard too. You know, you can be too early as well, you know, catching that wave at the right time, surviving long enough. I think going back to the blue ocean thing too, sometimes startups can seem similar, but actually can be helping each other build a market, you know?
Competition.
Yeah, and it's such a big place, you know, I mean, so many regions. You got my brain thinking about Cal State Fullerton. I just drove by there. It's almost 40,000 people. There's a police station. There's a medical center. There's sport team, you know, like, and what's funny, not to get on too big a tangent, your Ivy Leagues or your UCs kind of set the tone. And then like, yeah, it's interesting. The state schools I've always heard are good at teaching you how to fit a box and be in line, show up on time, turn in your thing. The Ivy Leagues and the upper echelons are better at like navigating a system, asking for things, working your way, politicking. And so I think if you're a state school kid like myself, you have to learn how to ask for things. And if you're used to asking for things and being able to finesse, you kind of have to learn that grind mentality a little bit. It seems like you kind of got to lean into whatever gaps you're missing, you know, but that's a whole other topic, you know, but I do think there's some good comparisons. And I came out of the moving and storage world, commercial moves, household moves, I grew up around it. So everyone wonders why I'm so positive around insurance. Like I don't have to manage a crew, you know, I don't have to go collect invoices from people I haven't paid, which is always very exciting. But
I can very much appreciate that from being in the real estate world and the challenges of dealing with contractors that are, we'll call it less than reliable as optimistic.
Yeah, especially business to consumer. B2B, you do pretty good, a little more organization, but business consumer always gets a little bit fun and tricky, you know. That's funny. Bryan, your whole career has been pretty much insurance, right? Like kind of, came over to the doctor, really?
Yeah, I mean, I came out undergrad and went to Liberty Mutual, so like I've always been there. When I was a consultant, I did one project on deodorant, like antiperspirant and deodorant, and I was the only person on the team who was psyched to be working on it. So I was like, wait, there's like a product, we can touch it without just printing it out first. Well, so I was jazzed up by that, but no one else was.
Well, InsurTech runners though too. I was telling David ahead of time. We're big fans of deodorant in the InsurTech running community.
Little did I know, right? I was just foretelling the future.
It's smell protection,
That's right.
No, but all this stuff is like, I want to say addicting to be around. It's just fun to help startups, work with startups, fun to find the right advocates at carriers. I'll give a shout out to our friends over at Grange, like Becky and Bobby, like they want to make things happen, and they're not, it's big national powerhouse, but they're a strong regional, and like kind of shows it's more of a mindset thing. And, it's just fun,
Yeah. Well, I was just talking to Brent Hammer at Grange about that, is like, that's a good example of a carrier who, not to name names, but a carrier who's like on almost every, at least in P&C, every InsurTech's list. Whenever I talk to an InsurTech, I'm like, so here are some carriers. You thought about Grange? Oh yeah, we got a call with Brent, or talking to someone there. And I'm like, how is this regional player in Ohio that's, just over the billion threshold. How are they on so many radar screens? And I don't know if you know Florian Grelot. He's a VC in Europe. He's like he's really engaged in the early stage scene. And one of the things
by any chance?
Is he French?
I think I might be thinking the wrong person. Sorry.
No, he is French, but
I think I know who you're talking about.
He's founded a firm with a partner of his called Astoria VC. He's huge on LinkedIn. So if you're like in InsurTech on LinkedIn, you've probably seen him. But he was like, I want all of these startups coming to me. And you might think like, it's too much, stop harassing me. I'm not going to give you all money, because he's a VC. It's like, no, they just want money, right? But he's like, no, on the contrary, I want everyone coming to me. I want all of yes, I'm going to do my research. We've got an algorithm. We're scanning for stuff, but I need to see everything that's out there to be able to tell like what's winning, what are the trends, where is there more activity, and what themes are starting up. And Brent had a very similar kind of message from Grange's perspective, is like, we want to be a carrier that all these providers seek out, even though it means, lots of inbound and you got to deal with people on LinkedIn reaching out, trying to sell you stuff. But the benefit of being one of those sought after carriers is huge, because you get access to the better solutions sooner. You can work through those processes better. You hear more honestly. Like, there's so many points that are upsides to it. And that's, again, like, what if we could help more carriers be sought after like that? And I think we need to get past the, and I get harassed on LinkedIn too. I get it. We need to get past the like, oh, I don't want anyone else coming to me. I'm tired of it. This is the 20th company today that's pitched me. And just recognize like, it only takes one of those to be unbelievable, right? And to change the game for your business. So you need to be able to see those to be able to tell, which ones to engage with. So there's definitely an upside to it.
Well, I think there's a network effect thing where the more things you can touch, you can connect the dots and they can kind of amplify each other. So even just being a node, it's helpful. My trick to LinkedIn, and I've tried to talk Ed Helsley off a mountain about this, or off a ledge, but just giving back the energy you get. So if somebody sends you like a bland baked message, you don't know much. If it's thoughtful, if they know who you are, they know why they're reaching out, deserve a little bit more feedback. I thoroughly enjoy it. For me, it's just really fun to have some really smart, nice, well-intentioned people reaching out. I always say it's some of the smartest, nicest people I've came across have been in this industry, and I appreciate you guys trying to network them. I appreciate, David, you bringing the experience of building something that sells into a carrier, Bryan touching all sorts of data points and deodorant now, we found out, we'll make sure to get the Insurance Collaboration Index in front of people,
Yeah. Well, can we just say before we go, because I know we're tight on time, but if people just go to InsuranceCollaborationIndex.com, it's long, but it's just words.com. There's a link right to the survey, or you can jump right to it at index.paperform.co. But we want people filling out the survey. It's free. There's upsides to completing it. There's little bonuses, so people should jump in.
Cool. I'll make sure to have all the data around there. But David, pleasure to meet you for the first time too. Looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, and hopefully you can join us in New York for one of our programs, and soon to be San Francisco. We're starting some stuff in December.
I like it. I will definitely want to touch both. I'm overdue to get back to New York. It's been 20 years. So, all right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. We'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks.